I reached out to Tennessee this morning and got some of their offensive records and benchmarks that you often see tweeted out if you're on the Twitter. And the question I had in response to LeBron James becoming the NBA's all-time scoring leader last night is where do some of these records actually sit historically and what Tennessee was able to do in 2022? So you have to, much like the NBA and LeBron, you have to kind of adjust for inflation, so to speak. The NBA, I mean, both teams in LeBron's game last night scored over 130. You saw how it wasn't that celebrated. It happened at midnight on a Tuesday, and it didn't have the punch that you thought it would have becoming the NBA's all-time scoring leader. It just didn't. And I think that Tennessee's offense has more punch in terms of what they've done. But Caleb, much like LeBron in the NBA, the game has changed tremendously. We've discussed the offensive lineman able to bolt downfield. We've on passing plays, RPOs. We've discussed what Tennessee is able to do. On the other hand, schematically. So, how much this is Josh Heupel, what we saw last year, and how much is it the state of the game, also allowing up tempo and not as many injury concerns going along, which Nick Saban hated. I mean, how much of that is each?
You're right. It's definitely a bit of a change of the game. I think that just jumping on LeBron for a minute, the intriguing thing about his record, though, is you're right. It's partially the change in the game, but not for LeBron's purposes, because the change in games doesn't benefit LeBron's style in scoring because it benefits 3-point shooters, which LeBron is not. So for him to break this record is really impressive, particularly when Kareem got the record. I asterisk that record because half of Kareem's career was played when the NBA was split, where half the stars were playing in the ABA, and that's when he was his most dominant. And by the time the ABA absolved into the NBA, Kareem was 31, 32, and yes, he was winning rings with the Lakers, but those Lakers teams were Magic's team, let's be honest.
Agree with that.
So I would agree to a certain degree because there are certain records that some Peyton Manning records are going to be broken by future Tennessee football quarterbacks. They're not going to be as impressive as Peyton Manning records were. They're just not. And you're right, you have to adjust. On a similar note, though, because of the change in the game, there are some pass records. We can go down if you want me to start them. I got a few off the top of my head, funny enough, that there are a few Tennessee football defensive records that will never be broken. Not just by Tennessee, by the way, but by anybody. No one will ever break a couple of Tennessee football defensive records in today's game.
Okay, well, let's get to those. So these are historic records?
Historic records, yes.
Okay, let me run this by you real quick before we do that. Single season records under Heupel, there were 16. And when we talk about offense only, total points, 599 last year. Total points per game, 46.1. Total offensive yards, 6,832. Offense per game, 525. Yards per play, 7.2. Touchdowns, 79. Passing touchdowns, 38. Rushing touchdowns, 40. These are all single season records. Completion percentage, 68.7. Passing efficiency, 181.39. Passing yards, for just over 4,200. Fewest interceptions thrown, 3. Points after touchdowns made, PAT 75. Total first downs, 330. Rushing first downs, 164. That's a long list of records, and there are some that can be attributed by the change of the game, but there are others, such as fewest interceptions thrown, which you can't attribute to the change of the game. You have to give complete credit to Josh Heupel, and in this case, Hendon Hooker, for what they did last year.
Oh, I agree. And nobody else did that. And also, even the one that stands out is fewest. You're breaking all these records, and then you have fewest interceptions in a year with 3. So that's not necessarily a change in the game because you're throwing it a lot more, and you still have the fewest interceptions. Now, part of that is things are more favorable to quarterbacks throwing the ball now, and I understand that. But no, I'm with you. I think that these records still stand on their own, and you have to give them a lot of credit for that. And I don't think that it's partially the change of the game, but it's not just the change of the game. No, I mean, there's been offensive friendly systems in the SEC now since 1990, and I haven't seen anybody do what Tennessee did last year. So
I agree. And when you compare it against the field, I think it eliminates any sort of asterisk like you could add to the guys that hit home runs, McGuire and Sosa and all those, or you could even add an asterisk for LeBron's record last night. And that is because the game has changed so much. But I don't see that at all with Tennessee. And here's why. Tennessee, let's just take scoring offense, for instance, was 46.1. That was 2 points, almost 2 full points better than Ohio State, which played next to nobody. And that was 5 points better than Southern Cal, which had the Heisman Trophy winner, 5 points better than Georgia and Alabama. Georgia, of course, won the national title. And so when I look at this list compared to the current day state of football, Josh Heupel is having fantastic success. I don't think these numbers are inflated by rules changes over the years at all.
Right, I agree. I don't think so either. Because the rules that would have changed, it would have benefited. Like you talked about the offensive lineman being able to play so many yards down the field. That's kind of been a thing in college football for, at least since Art Briles came on board with Baylor 15 years ago. And so I don't really see. I agree on that. I don't think it's also just the players though. Look, this is a Josh Heupel. This is an offense that is so ahead of its time that Jimmy Hyam said yesterday he doesn't think anybody's ever going to catch up with it, even if you get, as long as you have the right personnel. I don't know if that's true or not, but I tell you, I've listened to people break down this offense, and if you have fast receivers, a quarterback that can read a safety, and a quarterback that can convert on like 4 of 10 deep balls, I don't know how you scheme out of this offense.
Okay, so let me ask you this: rank them 1, 2, 3. State of the game, Josh Heupel players. What was primarily responsible in order for what Tennessee was able to do in 2022?
Josh Heupel, number 1.
Agreed.
Josh Heupel, number 1. I'll be fair. I'll go players number 2 because, like we talked about, state of the game, no one else is putting up these numbers. So state of the game, number 2. And I'm sorry, players number 2. Players number 2, excuse me. And then state of the game, number 3. And for the record, most records in football, when you see people do these things, I don't really put it on the state of the game. When Danny Warfel shattered every passing record known to man in the SEC in the mid 90s, I don't think that was the state of the game. That was more Steve Spurrier than Danny Warfel, though. Like Steve Spurrier was number 1, and then Danny Warfel was number 2 for that happening.
A distant number 2, I would argue. That was all Steve Spurrier. Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. Perhaps it's better broadcasting if I disagree just for the sake of it, but I'm not going to do that. I think it's Heupel 1, players maybe a closer 2 than you have them. I think they had a special group of receivers. I think I would actually put, and a special quarterback, I would put chemistry ahead of state of the game. Just innate chemistry. I think state of the game is actually 4th if I want to add that. And in the last part of it, I just think the chemistry that they stumbled upon was weird, and that's not was great for Tennessee. That's not a guarantee that it's going to happen in this upcoming season, but it is certainly a sign of good things as far as within that locker room, the way things work. I want to thank City Heating and Air Conditioning, cityheatandair.com. Portions of the program brought to you by the best HVAC dealer and that you can find in Knoxville. Just absolutely fantastic. City Heat and Air Conditioning, cityheatandair.com. Integrity matters. All right, so the defensive records you want to throw out there, ones that'll never be broken. And a lot of these records, Caleb, I'm just going to say, a lot of these offensive records, I would have said beforehand, they're never going to be broken, the ones I listed out earlier. But they were broken. I would have said the same thing about Kareem's, but you have Tennessee records from a defensive standpoint that will not be broken. What are they?
Yes. To me, the standout one the most is General Neyland, 1937 to 1939. 15 straight shutout wins. Here's the NCAA record, 1937 to 1940. 17 straight regular season shutout wins. That's never happening again in football at any level. I don't care. The game's changing, but that was impressive then because, guys, the shutouts were more common before the forward pass. The forward pass came at, like, what was it, 1904, 1903? So we're talking 35, 40 years after the forward pass, and they set that record, which is pretty impressive. Another one, and this is just because of the way stats are accumulated. Dave, you remember Andy Spiva?
Yes, I do.
547 career tackles, SEC record. The way they count tackles now, no one's coming close to that anymore. No one's going to come close to 547 career tackles. And my last one, this is a college football record that I'm sure has been broken, but I don't think it's a Tennessee record that'll be touched, which is Gene McKeever, 5 rushing touchdowns in a game against South Carolina in 1929. Tennessee just doesn't run like that anymore. And Chuck Webb, 294 rushing yards in a game against Ole Miss in 1989. I don't think either of those records is going to be broken.
No, Chuck Webb is pretty good.